In 2025, amid the relentless rhythm of modern Ho Chi Minh City, a man nearly 80 years old steps off a plane at Ton Son Nhat International Airport. His name is Richard Thompson, a former American soldier who once fought in the southern provinces of Vietnam in the late 1960s. His expression is solemn, his eyes carrying the weight of a memory too complex to be named. Half a century has passed since he was pulled from the battlefield, yet his return is not driven by nostalgia for war, but by a private memory that has never released him. As a young man stationed near Bien Hoa, he felt isolated and uncertain in an unfamiliar land. On one of his visits to Saigon, he met a young Vietnamese woman, Lê Thị Mai, who sold drinks near Ong Lang Market. She was calm, soft-spoken, her gaze steady and unshaken. They never dated in the conventional sense. There were no flowers, no candles, no lavish dinners. Their bond was forged in fleeting conversations, simple gestures, and the quiet normalcy that contrasted the violence surrounding him. Without speaking it aloud, Richard felt something stir within him, a truth more powerful than he could admit. Neither of them spoke of love. Neither of them spoke of the future. They both understood. Time was too short, reality too unforgiving. In the final months of 1972, when whispers of the Paris Peace Accords spread and the order to withdraw came, Richard was swept out of Vietnam without the chance for farewell. All he carried with him was a small photograph taken in front of the market, a silent vow engraved into his memory that if life allowed, he would one day return. Back in America, the chaos of war followed him. Images on television and in newspapers reignited his anger and grief. But deeper than the political turmoil was the unrelenting presence of her face in his thoughts. He married, raised children, built a life in Oregon, and fulfilled his duties as a father and a citizen. Yet every mention of Vietnam froze him into silence. Even surrounded by family, he carried a void that could not be spoken. After retirement, the void grew louder. His dreams no longer replayed the sounds of helicopters and gunfire, but the quiet image of the market stall, the gentle cadence of her voice, the steadfast calm in her eyes. The memory returned not as a scream, but as a persistent echo, gnawing away with silent insistence. When his wife passed in 2018, Richard found himself alone in the house they had built. His children were grown, his obligations completed. What remained was the question he had never answered. Was she still alive? Did she ever think of him? Had her life found peace? No record, no letter, no message ever came. And Richard understood with brutal clarity. If he did not return now, he would never forgive himself. So he prepared. He booked a ticket, gathered documents, exchanged currency, and packed only essentials: clothing, a notebook, and the photograph he had carried for 5 decades. The flight from Oregon to Saigon lasted nearly 20 hours. He could not sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, the past resurfaced with uncompromising force. There were no guarantees, no promises of closure, yet he had resolved that the search must begin. Richard Thompson did not come back for war stories. He came back for a missing piece of his life, a piece bearing the name Lê Thị Mai. He rented a modest room in a small hotel on Lê Lai Street, strategically close to the neighborhoods he once knew, especially the market where she had lived. From the moment of arrival, he began asking questions, sending letters, and reaching out through veteran networks and Vietnamese community groups both in America and abroad. Every answer was vague, every attempt inconclusive. Names had faded, addresses had vanished, and the decades had swallowed certainty whole. But his determination was absolute. He was not chasing ghosts of the battlefield. He was pursuing the one fragment of humanity that had once given him solace amid chaos. And that pursuit defined his return.
All indications point to the fact that she may have left after 1975, like thousands of others, as the city underwent irreversible transformations. Reports are fragmentary. Some claim the area around Co Ong Lang Market has been partially cleared or redeveloped. Individual memories have vanished. The old houses no longer exist, former neighbors dispersed, and social connections dissolved over decades. James accepted this as an inevitable trajectory, yet a persistent weight of disappointment remained. Despite mental preparation, the ambiguity and silence of these scattered clues pressed heavily upon him. Each day in Saigon, he carried a faded photograph, navigating congested streets, interrogating anyone who might have lived in that vicinity years ago. Lacking fluency in Vietnamese, often met with confusion, he maintained unwavering patience. His gaze revealed no resignation, only the urgency of one clinging to the final threads of hope. The cityscape had irreversibly shifted. Alleys once familiar twisted into new configurations. The small cafes where conversations flourished no longer existed. The market where Ling once sold her wares had vanished or relocated. James questioned elderly vendors, hoping someone might recognize the name or recall a woman named Ling living nearby. Yet their responses were either negative or vague, referencing a memory too faint to confirm. Each passing day eroded hope incrementally, provoking recurring self-doubt. Was it already too late? A woman over 60, selling che by the roadside, recalled living near the market as a child before her family moved to Thu Duc after reunification. When shown the photograph, her recognition was limited to a vague familiarity, indistinct among hundreds of faces faded in memory. James harbored no resentment. 50 years are sufficient to consign events to oblivion. For him, however, the recollection remained critical, not merely a fragment of the past, but the sole vestige of a future he could still claim. Despite mounting helplessness, he refused surrender. He traversed the narrow corridors around Ben Thanh Market, the area Ling had once described with luminous nostalgia, recalling her wish to reside there again for its joy and memories. Though her words were ephemeral in memory, James treated them as the final lead. He scrutinized every alley, every sign, questioning elderly proprietors. Nights returned him silently to the hotel. His daily findings yielded no progress. The countdown of remaining days amplified urgency. Resources were secondary, time was paramount. He feared the day he would have to leave Saigon without closure. At night, memories surfaced with precise clarity. Her expressions, her smiles, her gaze. Moments fleeting, yet etched indelibly. He never confessed love, she never promised to wait, yet the impressions endured, defining a lifetime. Awakened at 3 a.m., drenched in cold sweat, he recorded meticulous notes for the next day's route. Street names, points to revisit, potential informants. Fortune alone would not suffice. Silence in retreat was unacceptable. Deep within, he believed that if any connection persisted, however tenuous, it would manifest. Occasionally, he paused at familiar corners, hoping a glimpse might be hers, each misrecognition intensifying internal turmoil. Nevertheless, he persisted, for in seeking her, action replaced despair. A man shaped by war, by decades of longing, stood ready to stake all remaining possessions for even a single encounter. Saigon roared outside, yet in his modest hotel room on Lê Lai Street, the only audible presence was his own resolve. Before the photograph, eyes fixed, he confronted the immutable truth. Faded, yet vivid, Ling's image remained. Beside him in memory, she smiled gently, unadorned, holding a conical hat to shade from sunlight with Ben Thanh Market behind them, a silent witness to their brief wartime meetings. He recalled every shared moment at the nearby cafe, her morning errands to assist her mother, and his rare interludes of calm, absorbing her stories amidst the chaos of war. Nothing had changed, except the relentless passage of time, yet he would not relinquish the pursuit.
Even amid relentless conflict, the fleeting moments of connection remain his anchor to life, transforming him from a soldier entrenched in the battlefield to a man briefly tasting genuine happiness. He cannot erase her words from that August afternoon when he asked where she would want to live if they were ever together. Without hesitation, she named the area near Ben Thanh Market. Citing its bustling crowds, layered memories, familiar stalls, the early morning clatter of knives, and the rich aroma of roasted coffee. She smiled, insisting that merely walking through it daily would be joy enough. At the time, he responded only with a silent smile, yet that image etched itself deeply into his consciousness, an unspoken promise that required no validation. Decades later, in a foreign room within a transformed city, the vision of her eyes, speaking of that modest dream, remains intact. No mansion, no affluence, merely proximity to the market, seeing him each day and living in quietude. The simplicity of this desire outshines every experience he has encountered across America, revealing an irreplaceable void that no subsequent companionship could fulfill. Every woman thereafter was kind, yet none left him a pursuit of a promise so pure and enduring. On his desk lies a notebook, dense with addresses, annotations, and rudimentary maps, each page a testament to his unwavering resolve. Revisiting the earliest entries penned in America, planning his return to Vietnam, he observes the trembling script born of weakening hands. If she were alive, surely she would still be near the market. This single conviction tethered him to Saigon longer than intended, postponing his departure. He does not indulge in superstitions, yet at nearly 3 o'clock in the morning, her image visits him in dreams. Aged, hair streaked with silver, face thinner yet retaining its gentle countenance, standing at a market stall as if awaiting someone. He calls from a distance, but the crowd, dense and unyielding, prevents her from turning. The dream dissolves, leaving a persistent ache of loss and unresolved longing. Awakening before dawn, he surveys the city through the window. Traffic's murmur below, the persistent glow of the bus station's yellow light. Interpreting the vision as an unequivocal summons, he cannot allow more time to slip away. If a place merits his final exertion, it is Ben Tong Market, not as a monument of Saigon, but as the locus where her modest aspiration was once voiced. A man who failed to uphold a decades-old vow must at the very least attempt to fulfill the unfinished fragment of that promise. Walter dresses swiftly, gathers essential belongings, and steps into the pre-dawn streets. Breakfast unclaimed, no detailed plan conceived, only an absolute imperative drives him. He must reach the market today, as early as possible, not to acquire, not to encounter, but to confront the question within himself. Failure is possible. He may return empty-handed, merely another face lost in the throng. Yet the imperative is immutable. Memory has charted this course. On the journey, he scrutinizes every sign, stall, and elderly figure preparing their shop, aware that these could be her old acquaintances, neighbors, or witnesses to her final years of commerce. She, if still living, would be over 70, and the market would constitute her initial destination. This journey is not a quest for a specter within the crowd, but a reclamation of the fragment of his heart that remained unclaimed. If any hope has survived the relentless passage of decades, it resides incontrovertibly within the bustling heart of Ben Tong Market this morning. Walter moves forward with decisive resolve, every step an assertion of duty to a promise that transcends time, an unyielding testament that memory demands action and that the integrity of a lifetime is measured by the courage to pursue what the heart has long preserved.
By early morning, the market was scarcely awake, yet the first stalls had begun to set up. Jonathan paused at the entrance, drew a measured breath, and entered, moving deliberately through narrow aisles, scrutinizing each vendor, each glance, every face for a trace of recognition. He carried an old photograph, always ready to present it when he judged the person before him old enough to recall the past. But each inquiry yielded the same outcome: shaking heads, hesitant answers, vague recollections. His steps took him past textile stalls to the dry goods section, occasionally pausing at a name called aloud, Lila, only to find it a coincidental echo. Faces met him with indifference or polite curiosity, none offered certainty. Some glanced at the photo, remarking the woman resembled someone they once knew, but could not confirm her current whereabouts or true identity. A seasoned coffee vendor mentioned a woman by that name once operated nearby, but left long ago, with no knowledge of her fate. Jonathan noted everything meticulously, maintaining a strict restraint against hope that could breed disappointment.
By noon, under the merciless sun, sweat soaking his shirt, he continued relentlessly, canvassing every side street, speaking to itinerant vendors, motorbike couriers, elderly lottery sellers. Responses varied from suspicion to eager but fruitless assistance. A brief respite at a small roadside cafe offered no relief. Outside, the city surged with life. For Jonathan, the midday bustle was hollow, the energy around him irrelevant. As evening approached, he retraced paths previously unexplored, methodically leaving no avenue unchecked. Yet every lead proved barren. He questioned the eldest stallholder, a woman running a souvenir stand. She examined the photograph long, shook her head, conceding that many faces resembled it, but no memory remained. Jonathan thanked her, leaving with steps heavier than in the morning, the sky dimming to a gray dusk as city lights flickered alive. Venturing into a narrow alley near the old neighborhood where Lila had once lived, now replaced by concrete and modern structures, he paused at a green gate, not out of expectation, but a deep-seated sense of closure. Every possible path had been taken, every potential witness questioned, and yet no tangible thread remained. Back in his hotel room, the city sprawled beneath him. Streams of headlights, couples walking hand in hand, families gathering, youth lingering at street food stalls. Alone, Jonathan confronted the stark reality of his mission. He had arrived in Vietnam with fragile hope, seeking a reunion whose likelihood was minimal. Now, after exhaustive inquiries and repeated frustrations, doubt gnawed at his resolve. He studied the photograph again. Lila's gentle smile, serene gaze, a testament that his past was real, that their connection had not been an illusion. Yet reality threatened to erode certainty. Was she alive? Had she ever remembered him? Should he remain or accept irrevocable loss? The traffic outside roared, but it could not dispel the quiet torment within. Jonathan placed the photo down, contemplating whether another day might yield a witness. Yet he knew if tomorrow brought no revelation, the reason to persist would dissolve. Some questions defy reason, some journeys cannot be measured by outcomes. He understood this, but comprehension offered no solace. Night fell, he lay staring at the ceiling, eyes closed, memories flooding back. Her laughter, her voice, recounting tales, her declaration that she wished to live nearby. Though mere reverie, he yearned for a morning altered, not by magic, but by the smallest chance, a meeting, a familiar face, a sign that his return had not been in vain.
John awoke abruptly in the dead of night, heart racing and mind unsettled. The clock read 5 a.m., and without hesitation, he rose, compelled not by dreams but by the echo of a voice long etched in memory. That voice, reminding him of a life tethered to a presence he could not abandon, became his unyielding impetus. He left the hotel while the first whispers of dawn had yet to break, each step drawing him inexorably toward the old downtown market, the very place where in a fleeting dream Margaret had once stood. Her gaze, as he remembered, was a silent summons, carrying unspoken words that had lingered for decades. The motivation driving him forward was ambiguous, perhaps the residue of a dream, perhaps the final grasp at certainty in a life riddled with absence. But when clarity eludes, instinct remains the solitary guide. This time, John did not plunge directly into the bustling core of the market. He moved deliberately along the periphery, where street vendors and modest cafes lined narrow lanes. He scanned faces with painstaking precision, each encounter briefly jolting a pang of recognition, a test against half a century's erosion. Time could distort features, yet the human gaze retains indelible truth. Amid the crowd, something compelled him to pause. Ahead, a small cafe with basic aluminum tables sat tucked beside a building's flank. There, a silver-haired woman rested, hands folded over the reflective metal, eyes initially averted. Yet as her glance swept the scene and landed on him, the ambient clamor seemed suspended. No name was spoken, no greeting exchanged. Yet he understood instantly that this gaze embodied every nuance of memory. Gentleness, restrained sorrow, an intimate essence unique to her.
They stood, suspended in mutual recognition, years collapsing into a singular moment. Slowly, he approached, words not necessary, and in a voice trembling yet resolute, spoke her name. Her eyes widened, a shock of disbelief and recollection flickering across her face, then voice emerged, each syllable a careful retrieval from a sealed vault of memory. Tears fell unbidden, unclaimed by explanation. Amid the hurried market, amidst the chaos of commerce, time itself receded. Only their shared history existed. A dense convergence of unspoken questions, unresolved longing, and enduring affection, compressed into an hour that felt like a lifetime. John recounted his decades in America, his unwavering remembrance, the photograph preserved for 50 years. Margaret revealed her own journey, years of market mornings, solitary reflection, survival through upheaval, returning in later years to the same modest stall with her water cart, untouched by connection or inquiry regarding him. Following the upheavals of 1975, her life mirrored the city's transformation. Displacement, labor, endurance, yet memory of him persisted, a silent lodestar. They conversed without hurry, articulating truths accumulated in absence, acknowledging that separation had not stemmed from choice, but from the inexorable cruelty of circumstance. This recognition rendered their reunion sacred, impervious to resentment, unshaken by time. When John prepared to depart, she invited him home, a small, unassuming residence a short distance from the market, nestled in a lane retaining the patina of old Saigon. He accepted without inquiry, comprehension sufficing. The search had culminated. The fragment missing from half a century of life now resided tangible and complete, carrying every trace of memory and untold revelation. No distance remained. No wartime chasms, no exile, only the words long deferred and the days ahead to reconcile past and present. The house, ensconced in the quiet lane, preserves echoes of a once vibrant life. Children playing, street vendors plying their trade, now subdued but lingering in spirit. John followed Margaret inside, unspoken sentiment swelling in his chest, a profound recognition of the closure, the irrevocable weight and relief of rediscovery.
He had envisioned this moment countless times, yet no anticipation could replicate the reality unfolding before him. The house was modest, its walls weathered and flaking with age, yet immaculate, every object meticulously arranged. A handful of old photographs adorned the walls, some faded black and white, indistinct. One showed Margaret with an older man, another depicted a young man standing beside a worn bicycle. James froze as his eyes met that of the older man in the photograph, a fleeting furrow of recognition creasing his brow. It was an intuition, subtle but insistent, impossible to ignore. Margaret entered, her voice calling a name softly. From the adjacent room, a man in his 40s stepped forward. His posture was resolute, hair streaked with silver, nose sharp, eyes penetrating. On seeing James, his expression flickered with surprise, then swiftly hardened into controlled neutrality, concealing the storm beneath. James remained motionless, scrutinizing every contour of that face, the lines, the expressions, the echoes of a past he had never known. The familiarity struck him with a pang, not from estrangement, but from an almost instinctive recognition of blood and history. Margaret placed a hand on James's shoulder. Her tone deepened, paused deliberately, then began to unravel the knot tied in silence over decades. This man before him was his son. James absorbed the revelation in stunned silence, as Margaret recounted the truth. When he had departed the United States, she had not yet informed him of her pregnancy. Once confirmed, she resolved to keep the child, despite the societal scrutiny and judgment surrounding mixed-race offspring at the time. She never contemplated abortion. The child's life was non-negotiable. She had named him Michael Thomas. Michael grew up amidst whispers, enduring silent questions about the father he never knew. Margaret's disclosures were measured. His father was a foreigner, forced to leave by conflict. Michael, perceptive and respectful of his mother's struggles, rarely inquired further. As he matured, his resemblance to James became undeniable. The features, the mannerisms, the expressions mirrored James in his youth. Margaret had no means to contact James. His fate remained uncertain, and time cruelly withheld reunion. Years later, through an official reunion program, she initiated the paperwork, only for circumstances to intervene. Her subsequent husband fell gravely ill. She could not leave him. After his passing, the opportunity closed, leaving only the hope that Michael would live honorably, unburdened by resentment. James listened, heart constrained by disbelief. He had not anticipated fatherhood, let alone a son who had spent decades within the very city he had once roamed. He lowered his gaze to Michael, whose eyes conveyed a blend of caution and quiet resilience. No accusation, no anger, only a disciplined wariness forged by life's unresolved ruptures. James's voice cracked as he spoke, issuing the only truth he could: regret, acknowledgement, and the affirmation that absence had been born of chaos and heartbreak, not choice. He sought a signal, any gesture, to know he might still fulfill the role denied for so long. Michael remained silent, then inclined his head, a concession, not absolution, but recognition, a slender bridge over a chasm of lost time. Margaret joined them, recounting fragments of Michael's youth, moments of bullying, sparse meals, relentless perseverance. James absorbed each detail, the gravity of absence pressing upon him. He had missed the formative pains, the silent questions that only a father's presence could answer. In that room, words were sparse, presence alone sufficed. The mere acknowledgement of shared existence, after decades of separation, was the foundation for any future. The following morning, James awoke in the small room behind Margaret's home, the memories of sleep indistinct, as if the night had been a continuum of silent reflection. Margaret tidied the remnants of the past, a frayed cloth containing letters, a small journal, and Michael's worn childhood shoes. She retained these artifacts not as relics of bitterness, but as anchors to decades of singular devotion, a testament to perseverance, and an unyielding commitment to integrity. The narrative left no ambiguity. Life demands accountability, recognition of consequence, and above all the courage to confront truths long deferred, for only then can reconciliation, however measured, begin.
David entered, nodding to Walter with a gesture now habitual, shedding yesterday's hesitance, but not yet reaching the ease of a lifelong bond. He explained that he had business at his restaurant and invited Walter to join him. The eatery, a hybrid of American and Vietnamese cuisine, stood near Ben Thanh Market. Once a mere employee for others, David had saved enough to open his own establishment. Though modest in size, the restaurant thrived, drawing mostly international tourists eager for Saigon's unique flavors, alongside local patrons familiar with its reputation. Walter followed David inside, noting the inventive menu: American-style sausage sandwiches infused with Vietnamese herbs and signature sauces, classic buttery popcorn accented with Tainan shrimp salt, wooden stools, handwritten chalk signage, and a corner adorned with photographs of visitors from around the world reflected a careful yet understated pride. David did not boast. He described his business as sufficient to live on, providing for his mother, securing steady income, and earning the genuine appreciation of his clientele. Observing his son at work, Walter recognized meticulous care, patience, and diligence in every movement, a mirror of his own work ethic, not in appearance but in principle. He realized that David had matured independently, cultivating integrity and resilience without paternal guidance, provoking both remorse and admiration in Walter. At the peak lunch hour, David invited Walter to dine with several staff members. Amid the clatter and conversation, Walter felt a weight lift. The silent loneliness and emptiness of years replaced by a gradual but undeniable reconnection. Though David spoke little, his gaze communicated a shift, no longer distant, no longer unfamiliar. Returning home that afternoon, Walter told Mrs. Nguyen he had no intention of returning to the United States. His reasons to leave had vanished. What mattered now existed in Vietnam: the woman he once loved, the son he had lost. He acknowledged the brevity of his remaining years but believed in his capacity to care, to contribute, and to seize opportunities previously denied. Mrs. Nguyen, unsurprised, responded, If staying brings you peace, it is the correct choice. Life has granted a second chance. Cherish each day, each moment. From that day, Walter took residence in the small room behind her home, assisting with simple morning meals, shopping alongside her for precise cuts of meat and vegetables, visiting David's restaurant to converse with customers and attempt Vietnamese phrases with good-natured persistence. Though imperfectly understood at times, his sincerity charmed all. Gradually, David entrusted him with minor managerial duties, reviewing accounts together at day's end. Walter experienced renewal, not as atonement, but as the deliberate embrace of presence. Each evening, the three shared unpretentious meals: sour soup, braised fish, steamed greens. These were for Walter the most nourishing meals of his life. He learned the subtleties of Vietnamese dining, the cadences of his son's language, and the rhythm of daily life that had once seemed alien. The city's clamor persisted, yet within that modest home, a family reconstructed itself over 50 years of separation, requiring neither grand promises nor spectacle, only the willingness to remain, to accept one another, and to recognize that shared presence after decades constitutes its own profound happiness. Over a month since Walter's return, life in the alley adjacent to Benton Market established a steady cadence, no longer burdened by waiting or regret, but by simple, shared routines, communal meals, unguarded conversation, and quiet summer afternoons reading on the veranda while Mrs. Nguyen rested beside the old electric fan. David evolved beyond a shopkeeper, becoming the bridge between two generations, two fragmented lives, narrating, sharing, and including his father in gatherings previously avoided. Walter, initially hesitant, learned the discipline of listening, the clarity of presence, and the unalterable truth that the past cannot be rewritten, but the present can be inhabited fully. One late afternoon, David brought him to a small community event in Tao Don Park, where Walter encountered other mixed heritage children, some who had lived in the U.S., others rooted entirely in Vietnam. They recounted childhood memories and long-suppressed chapters of life. Walter sat silently, eyes distant, then offered apologies, not solely to David, but universally, to all whose paths he had intersected. He acknowledged his partial ignorance, yet comprehended that his presence, though belated, could no longer inflict unintended voids in lives deprived of choice. This recognition, firm, unyielding, and precise, signaled a reclamation of responsibility, a deliberate engagement with life, and the irrefutable assertion that authentic presence, even delayed, carries irrevocable consequence. A man's applause echoed, unchallenged, unjudged, for no one condemned him. No one condemned fathers like him. They merely traverse time silently and endure. Yet in that instant, a dormant wound within Walter ignited and closed under the unspoken forgiveness of those strong enough to demand no acknowledgement. On the drive back, David remained silent, then said, "Today I saw that you truly belong here." Walter smiled. For the first time, he no longer felt like a guest. Saigon was no longer a destination. It had become home. In the ensuing days, Walter devoted himself to writing. In a new journal, he recorded each day in Vietnam, every memory with Mrs. Nguyen, and every untold story with his son. He wrote not to publish, not for validation, but to preserve what he had painstakingly reclaimed. The journal rested on his bedside. Each morning he opened it ritualistically, grounding himself for the day ahead. Mrs. Nguyen no longer ventured to the coffee stall. After more than 40 years of commerce, she retired, entrusting mornings to quietude. Walter brewed her coffee personally, sliced the fruit, and read brief news snippets anchoring their shared serenity. She no longer sought the world outside, only the presence of the man who had entered and quietly transformed her life. He returned, no longer youthful, no longer invincible, yet possessed a stillness that earned her unwavering trust. One day, David installed a new sign in both Vietnamese and English above the shop. The kitchen of father and son, with a discreet note beneath, a space to share meals and unfinished stories. Walter choked back words, aware that while their time together was finite, Each day held complete significance. No delay is meaningless if one retains the courage to speak the truth. 3 months later, Walter underwent a routine medical examination. The physician instructed him to limit travel, rest, and monitor his cardiovascular health. He acknowledged without alarm or surprise, age reveals all truths, yet he harbored no regrets. He had lived, loved, reclaimed what he had lost, and embraced a son never physically present in memory. Each evening, he and Mrs. Nguyen sat on the porch, exchanging trivial tales, then listening to the wind stir the old metal roofs. David occasionally joined, absorbing accounts of his father's youth, America, and fragmented curiosities. Laughter faded into silence, their mere presence sufficient. They spoke not of the future nor of lost years. They inhabited the present, a peace rarely experienced across lifetimes. One evening, Walter inscribed in the journal, "If reborn, I wish only to be an ordinary man, loving an ordinary Vietnamese woman, living a life without war." He lowered the pen, gazing at Saigon's darkened skyline, punctuated by faint, golden windows. Time lost is irretrievable, yet one can always restart with what remains: love. In that modest home at the alley's end, within a city that never sleeps, a nearly 80-year-old man discovered what he thought vanished. Here he was no veteran, no traveler, merely a father, a partner, a human fully inhabiting each remaining moment. Life demands no perfect conclusion. The opportunity to restart with sincerity renders every instant profoundly beautiful. This journey, reclaiming love after half a century, transcends individual experience. It underscores the enduring value of forgiveness, the relentless passage of time, and the irrepressible power of the human heart to reunite with what it once lost.